Hey, I'm John from John Ash Contracting, third generation roofing company. But today we're not going to talk about roofing. We're going to talk about comic books, my love of them, and my brief history with comic books. We're going to start by mentioning the Batakus brothers. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Back around the late 70s, I was a much younger man, and the Batakus brothers owned a small motorcycle parts store for choppers and to work on your bike. I had back then, a Honda 350, and I thought I was doing something kind of cool. It was probably kind of nerdy, but I was going into the Batakus brothers shop, and I was buying parts to put an extended front end on my Honda 350 and to change the forward primary gear and putting on a sissy bar and doing things of that nature. So I got to know a little bit of the Batakus brothers. A few years later, I wanted to open up a comic book shop. I've been reading them since I was a little boy and always liked comics and thought it'd be cool to open a comic book shop, having no idea where I would end up while doing this. Just figured I'd give it a shot. And I rented the shop from the Batakus brothers, a little store, which I believe is where their motorcycle shop used to be. So now I have a comic shop. Regrettably, back in those days, I was not thinking about photographs for the future, and I have a couple, maybe two small photographs you can see here of that shop. Regrettably, not a lot more. So I opened the shop, and initially I didn't sell new comics. I bought, sold, and traded old comics, and initially I was called John's Comics and Stuff was the name of the business. Later I changed that name within the year to Trader John, because what happened after trading comic books for other comic books, younger kids would stop in and say, here, I have these baseball cards, Nintendo games, cassettes, records. Can I trade for stuff? And at first I said no and resisted. Later on thought might be a good idea. So people would come in and they would put stuff on my counter, and I would say, I would give you $7 for this, or maybe $12 in store trade. And most people would take the store trade. It's interesting if you think about the math exponentially, what happened, somebody would bring in comics that might be worth $100, and I might offer them $30 in trade, and they would take $30 in trade for comics that I might have paid $10 for, and that $10 in value grew to $100, and then later on the $100 grew to $500, and in a very short period of time, I started the store with maybe 20 long boxes of comics. And for those of you who don't know, there's about 300 comics in a long box. I ended up very quickly, within about 2 years, within about 100, for about 150 boxes of comics, worth a lot of money back then. Not worth anywhere near the money they're worth today. I could have been a multi-millionaire, literally, if I would have kept all my comics and never sold them. But the problem, if you don't sell the comics, you can't pay the bills. Now, after a while in my store, I became known in the neighborhood as a guy who sold video games and records, cassettes, mostly comics and other stuff. I took in trade a bumper pool table. I took in trade a video camera. It got to be interesting, but of course, comics was always the main thing. After a couple of years of never selling new comics, and everybody always asking me, what about new comics? I learned of Walter Wang, who was the owner, if I'm saying this right, of Comics Limited, Unlimited in Staten Island. And I got to know him, and well, not him personally, but his business. And every Wednesday, I would drive to Staten Island for years, like clockwork, rain or shine, snow, whatever. You had to go because the kids were ravenous and they had to have their comic fix by Wednesday or Thursday. But I would go every Wednesday to get my comics, and a bunch of the neighborhood kids would work for trade, and they would help me bag and board hundreds of comics and label who gets them, and then the kids would come in, they have little packages ready to go, and I started getting into new comics. There's a lot more to my story. I ended up having 8 different comic stores, and this is only the first video. We're going to have 2 or 3, or maybe if you're lucky, 4 more videos about my life with comics soon, possibly on the next Wacky Wednesday, and the next, and the next, and the next. Before I go, one quick thing I want to show you. My favorite character, I'm a Marvel snob. That's something they call us Marvel guys, Marvel snobs. I like DC, but I like way more Marvel. My favorite character is the Silver Surfer. And of course, who made Silver Surfer, if you can see it, is Galactus, which is kind of hard to see. And I like all that storyline involving outer space with Silver Surfer and Galactus. This is probably one of my favorite covers, with Silver Surfer attacking Thor. And when this comic actually came out, it was a low distribution, which just happened to be an accident back in the day. Because it has a special cover of these 2 characters and low distribution, it's quite valuable. I picked up a copy of this recently. I could have got it back in the day for 25 cents. I had to pay over $2,000 for it today. I should have bought it a few years ago. And also, just to mention, I had 2 copies of Silver Surfer #1. Back in the early 80s, I sold them both for about $200 each. Today, I could have gotten probably about $15,000, $20,000 each. Things have changed. Anyhow, talk to you later.